trying to figure out the best way to go about certain things. I have a little bit written down for like a reference point or starting point, or if I get off into the rails, I can kind of tone it back in. This video, to a large extent, is to try to articulate what it is that I believe that I have been experiencing since waking up, or, unnumbing my consciousness. I truly believe that, although I was under the impression that I fell partly on the spectrum, I'm slowly starting to recognize that literally all individuals live within a larger conscious spectrum, and that certain highlighted features are where you would classify kind of any of the mental or cognitive disorders. And the only way I can describe myself to a large extent is like a free-range spectrum individual. For the last year, a lot of it has been at the whims of what is around me, as opposed to me reigning in control of it and then recognizing the different attributes or aspects of what I am experiencing. I mean, although usually all aspects are still consciously perceived, whether consciously or unconsciously, the totality of what their experiences is trying to articulate or get into a person's conscious mind, as opposed to just unconsciously relaying information, has been very difficult. So, to a large extent, to see anything in and of itself and then to deconstruct, as well as to find a linguistic structure to reconstruct it so as to not just be a deconstructionalist, is highly beneficial regardless of where you lie on the spectrum. I have a lot of concepts that, like, whether or not you believe them or you can follow kind of the structural aspects of the linguistics to carry you to a full comprehension of the ideal in and of itself, an individual's inability to supersede my conceptuality doesn't negate the facts or the potential variable for those facts to exist. That was one of the first things I noticed ever since childhood, was that I could see all of these potential variables at play. Now I've had to kind of numb my mind to this in order to basically live as a regular person, or at least, and I hate using that word because everybody has these things. To what level and what degree is different for everybody, but in order to function in the society that we exist in right now, people like me, or a lot of people out there on psychotropic medication, are literally numbing certain cognitive aspects of their consciousness in order to facilitate a harmonious existence within, the perceived societal structure that was created to kind of either maintain or offset certain features from developing, or highlighting certain features so that they did develop within individuals. And I can diverge into a lot of different aspects and speak on a lot of different topics, and they all tend to derive from similar sources. It's kind of not like there's a starting point and an end point. It's just that once you hop on, that's where you can take it, and then it will lead you right back to where you got on. Or you could, and this goes for anything, so like you can hop on any concept or conceptuality, and you can follow it to its nth degree, and usually within its nth degree is the structural beginning of where you had started. Very confusing, kind of paradoxical, but these are things that, like, a lot of individuals recognize. So the certain aspects of autism, I believe, correlate to the senses in and of themselves, as well as, like on a rainbow, you start to get outside of the visible spectrum. So there are aspects that, like, within society, these things are pertinent and they play a huge role and they're vital to the success and the maintenance of humanity. At the same time, some of them you cannot visually see, and without sort of the structural underpinnings of their own foundation, they are kind of hidden from the larger picture because they are outside of like a perceptual realm. It doesn't negate their existence. It literally just means that our consciousness has not expanded to the point for where we can actually start to understand or parse apart certain aspects of this. And I believe a lot of these are structured on dualities, where, like, I can say this thing exists and you can say it doesn't exist, but until there's literal scientific data or factual data or some sort of structural orientation, so your cognition can follow that path. It's kind of that a duality. It could exist, it couldn't exist. But the reason that certain people are able to structurally abstract things out and then retain, it's like jumping into the deep end of the pool. And even though most people can't tell you how deep the bottom is, some people can find their way back to the edge of the pool and show people, hey, this is where I jumped in, this is how far I got, this is how deep it is there. Whether or not you're ready to jump in, that's each individual's own prerogative. Some of these things are highly detrimental to the continuation of an individuality or the ego. Some of them are detrimental to the societal structure in which we find ourselves permeating or existing in. So I'm not saying that we should necessarily take certain things to the nth degree or the degree where it starts to actually be counterproductive or counter-constructive, but I do believe that certain aspects need to be highlighted and recognized in order to facilitate the necessary changes to, one, retain individuality within conscious creatures, two, to maintain homeostasis on the planet that we reside, and three, to be able to abstract out conceptual ways to venture off of our planet and interstellar space, which is long term, so we have to do interplanetary alignments and adjustments in order to facilitate the next stage of long-term perturbation for conscious creatures, if that makes sense. That's very out there. The experiences are just that, so they fall to a large extent, like the rainbow spectrum should be viewed as your sense spectrum. So you have an ocular spectrum, a sense sniff, a scent spectrum, a taste, feeling. You also have intuition, which is a weird one, and there's also structural variables that attribute to why people have the intuition that they have. I'll go into that later, but they are just aspects of things that we have yet to recognize or yet to come to terms with. There's the ocular structure, hearing, as well as visual. And visual is weird because that's where we start to construct the linguistic structures. And the linguistic structures in themselves are, like I said, I can jump into the deep end and tell you that they are literally energetic frequencies that we structure our own emotional conceptuality around. And that's very vague, but to a large extent it's true because of the fact that you as an individual are able to even comprehend or understand some of the things that I am attempting to articulate. And then you do this through a linguistic structure. Now, semantics kind of shows the variables in which the structure itself can arise through a three-dimensional augmentation of two-dimensional writings. I don't know, it gets really weird. So I'm not going to go too far into that just yet. And then kind of the outlets for growth. So to a large extent, if we have, this kind of applies to shamanism, and this is kind of where I got some of the conceptualities, but that certain aspects within our society or within the culture, whether they're detrimental or positive, they start to elicit certain attributes or characteristics or traits to arise within a small select group of the population. And for a long time, those were viewed as teachers or learners, hey, this is something that's arising within our culture. We should look to them to see what it reflects upon ourselves and what it reflects upon as the larger whole. Now, we've basically shunned these people and tried to numb their minds so as to not allow for that large-scale growth of cognition or towards functionality or whatever it is that their existence kind of reflects back on the larger structure in which they reside. So, to a large extent, each of the spectrum traits that we find, as well as the mental and cognitive deficiencies or whatever you want to call them, to a large extent, they are based upon aspects of our society that we have either yet to adjust or that we recognize, but we are too kind of enveloped within the material aspects of things as so to not want certain things that are being highlighted to actually come to light because of disruptions or augmentation that is necessary to facilitate next level changes within the structural society, as well as access. So to a large extent, people have access to small scale parts of a larger picture. And even within my small group of individuals that I somewhat associate with from time to time, I'm starting to recognize all of these aspects and outlets that certain emotional or cognitive functions are starting to, well, it's not that they're starting because they literally just always permeate there, but the thing is, you have to kind of almost separate yourself from them in order to recognize them as such. And so, like, people who work with people with autism might get a glimpse, a small, like, reflection of themselves within the individual that they're helping or communicating with, but not fully recognizing that the totality of themselves helps facilitate a better understanding of what the other individual is experiencing, and it works vice versa. Um, so that's kind of where I'm at as far as like at least getting a better understanding as to what is taking place in my mind. Um, I mean, there's a lot of other aspects that apply to science, psychology, physics, metaphysics, quantum, that I'm going to attempt to go down in the future and have actual like notes that I can follow so as to not get off the rails on those, because to a large extent everything is interconnected, and our inability to recognize the interconnectedness of everything is one of the biggest fundamental flaws of a singularistic individual consciousness. And although those perceptual variables arise within the singularity of an individual, they permeate all aspects of interconnectedness within the structure itself. This is very difficult. Well, it's not. It's actually very simple. If you live on the world, to a large extent, you're part of a perceptual variable that guidelines have been built or structured upon so as to continue the facilitation of conscious individuals who reside here. Now, it's just the level of consciousness that we have reached kind of is that plateau where you must understand that the totality of all understanding resides within your conscious parameters. Now, it doesn't mean that each individual is going to understand everything, and it doesn't mean that each individual can, to a large extent, understand everything, because to a large extent, our egoistic or individualistic desire to maintain a separate self from the structure around us causes like cognitive dissonance. If I'm going to tell you certain aspects that apply to everybody, then you might take offense or be bothered by my ability to highlight characteristics that you have yet come to recognize or have no willingness to alter or change. And that's okay. Everybody has those things within them, but at the same time, to outright deny that they exist without any sort of actual logicality or articulation as to why your conceptuality is better, it may literally just be that you are under flawed programming or a false program system in order to maintain this structure that you preside under. Not saying that it's wrong and not saying that it's right, it's just saying that it might not necessarily be the most beneficial or conducive to a large-scale structural understanding of yourself or your place within the large-scale structure. So I guess the term that I keep coming back to is free-ranged autism, so that like certain individuals with this quality or characteristic literally filter through all aspects of autism, whether it's the verbal, the linguistics, the ocular, the symbolic, the metaphysical, the physical, music scales, music structure, linguistic structures, poetic structures. These are all things that we filter through and recognize as such. And each time we go back through around them, it's just adding another layer upon the already understood structure that previously was attained the last time it was ran through. And this kind of happens with a lot of things. I mean, each time I go outside and interact with individuals, like I gain a new sense of understanding for how individual cognition works, as well as for like the individualistic ego, as well as like the shadow or the collective unconscious, which is a definite thing. And that's a whole nother level. But at the same time, certain individuals kind of permeate that collective unconscious and allow for almost like at any moment in time when you're talking to two individuals, you have a conscious thing that is communicating and you have an unconscious thing that is communicating. And regardless of your ability to recognize the unconscious aspect or your ability to pick up on certain aspects, it allows for kind of a deeper or more profound ability to exchange conscious aspects as well as cognitive functions. And to a large extent, when this first started taking place, I had to sleep a lot and rest a lot because my mind was literally starting to rewire and recreate or restructure the neurological pathways within my mind. And each time I have these conversations with people, to a large extent, the conversation will get to a point where their mind can no longer take in this much informational data. So we have to kind of either they will shut down the conversation or they will like physically become exhausted from certain aspects of this. So I'm trying to parse them out into small, more digestible things, as well as I'm trying to use simpler language. And I hate to use the word simpler, and like I'm not trying to say like anything is better than the other, because like in a room full of individuals that I can communicate like this with, it's highly more beneficial for extensive growth of these cognitive functions. But at the same time, if I continuously communicate like this, most people don't have the retention ability nor the cognitive functions to facilitate the neurological growth that is necessary. Because each time you have these conversations, your brain is literally trying to attach itself to new parameters for its own cognition. It's like your mind literally is a computer. You are rewiring it through the linguistic structure that you're either taking in or you're, outputting to a large extent. And your individual ability to recognize and transform certain aspects that you take in directly correlate to your ability for individual cognitive growth. So like if I tell you a bunch of things and they all go over your head, not much is going to change in the neurological structure. If I tell you a bunch of things and little things start to change over a large period of time, those little changes literally have rewired the whole cognitive structure. Now, it's not me as an individual, because you can go out and talk to anybody, and if you're able to recognize these things within other individuals and apply it to your own cognition, or to see the flaws in your cognition because of somebody else's better understanding of something, then you have geared yourself to be like the teacher and the learner, where your mind literally is learning and teaching you simultaneously, and you kind of are just the conduit to facilitate that new level of understanding or that new aspect of cognition. So yeah, I'm gonna just call this one free range autism, and I'll try to do another one tonight. The thing is, when this all took place, it was literally like throwing a monkey wrench in my entire life. So I've had to slowly figure out exactly what has been taking place cognitively, because to a large extent, people who are like abruptly addressed with certain aspects of the way that I talk or the way that I perceive the world around me kind of lean towards some sort of like flawed understanding of medical diagnosis or psychological diagnosis, which can be frustrating for the individual like myself, because to a large extent I see that as like a projection mechanism to obfuscate their inability to understand, which that's totally fine, but I would rather you just be like, I don't fully get it, as to be like, you sound crazy, you shouldn't talk like that. It's like, well, this is who I am, I'm sorry, I appreciate your input. At the same time, unless you're articulating some conceptuality that supersedes my own understanding, do not try to displace mine. And the moment that yours supersedes mine, I will literally migrate to your conceptuality and start to alter my cognition in order to facilitate a larger understanding. This is what individuals who seek knowledge usually try to do. So that kind of is my goal, is to just kind of keep retaining information, keep deconstructing and applying kind of aspects of modern science while still not letting go of certain aspects that I perceive as flawed within the modern scientific fields. And that's kind of the whole basis of this, is to eventually get a platform where I can start to talk to physicists or psychologists or quantum mechanics or biologists, any of these scientific fields. And I see certain things that like I haven't heard anybody else talk about. So for me, it's like, if I have the conceptualization, and it might be flawed, but if it is flawed, the only way that I'm going to learn something that supersedes that is to listen to people to tell me which attributes or areas that I'm flawed in. Where like, if there's some field of science that like kind of has hit a wall, and I say, hey, why don't you investigate this? There's hundreds of people out there who would literally dedicate their entire life to facilitating the true and scientific ways to understand what it is that I am conceptually articulating. And me, I could do it as well, but it seems almost like a fundamental waste of whatever this thing is to gear my entire existence towards one attribute, when in reality, by just kind of kicking the ball or passing the baton to somebody else and letting them run as far as they will go, because I know they'll go a lot farther than I would, it seems more beneficial and conducive to the like growth of the whole. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and that's where my mind is kind of going. I'm trying to restructure things so I can kind of be more consistent with aspects, because I'm still kind of all over the place and I have no set routine, which I like. I like that free mobility, but at the same time, it's not conducive to, I guess, surviving in this, society. And although I wouldn't mind being homeless, this is not the weather nor the place that I should do it. So that's kind of where I'm at as far as the autism aspect. Short of schizophrenia, I think I can pretty much maintain all psychological conditions. And even schizophrenia, I can comprehend it, dissect it, and re-articulate it into a better structural understanding of what is taking place. But as far as allowing my mind to literally facilitate its own structural creation of um, like schizophrenia within my own mind, which I do perceive would be detrimental in the long term, I'm gonna like retain my ability to not go down that path. But I do want to actually start to help in a lot of ways to start to like parse out and deconstruct why individuals kind of have this split or divergent conscious aspect that facilitates, our technical term of schizophrenia. Because there are like structural reasons for it, as well as PTSD. PTSD is a weird one, and I want to get into that one soon as well, because I think a lot of people can benefit from a true understanding of what has taken place, especially if it's in like vet, be it the like war or tragic situations where there is some fundamental aspect that gets cut off, and then the individuals are kind of left in a isolated within their own minds. And that's like the simplest way to determine it, but at the same time, I think there's more scientific variables that are at play in that field, in a lot of these fields. So I'm kind of just trying to take it one step at a time. So yeah, that's my story about free range autism and the fact that you're all on a spectrum. So don't think one person might be more highly intelligent in this realm, but then completely flawed in another realm. And everybody has that. And for me, I've been trying to like balance all aspects, but in the long term, it's beneficial. In the short term, it's incredibly counterproductive, because I have to chip away at little bits at all the time while still maintaining a larger whole. So it's like I'm basically carving a statue in a bunch of different scientific fields, but I am only allowed to chip away a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. And although I can kind of balance and maintain all aspects, and the moment that they are brought to like the forefront of my cognition, I can bring that statue back up and be like, hey, this is where I'm going, or this is what I've recognized, this is what I've seen. But at the same time, for me to like individualistically go through and parse out a solid formed idea would take an immense amount of time, where I'm trying to kind of be a well-rounded individual in all of these aspects, so as to, I don't know, be able to start to explain a lot of these things. So I'll cut it there, because that's probably long enough, and I don't have electricity at my house, so a lot of this is, backup batteries and going to the library a lot. So we'll pick up a little later.